It started in 1952 on a sunny summer afternoon. Mr. Dunlap gathered us together to hear Dr. Frank Gaberline speak to us on the vision he had of a Christian school. And we gathered around. We were young couples with children just getting into school age. We caught the vision of being able to have our children taught in school about God. The Pattern of God's Truth was the name of Dr. Gaberline's book. Norfolk Christian Schools was not to be a glorified Sunday school or a vacation Bible school. It was to be a quality education for our children. We worked with the State Board of Education. Teachers were to be certified, and we went through a few years of thinking of the school perhaps of being an evangelistic outreach, and soon found that that didn't work at that point. So the school developed policies where they had families come in who really wanted their children to be taught of the Lord.
John, from the time he came out of school, was burdened about Christian education. He had we met at Nyack Bible College, Christian Missionary Alliance. He had took several courses in the city, would go down to New York City, and he sat under Professor Cummings, who just turned him around from the standpoint of the value of Christian ed and the legitimacy of it. He had decided, he'd gone to a small Christian school for high school, I think. He decided that it wasn't necessary, but he came out of there really convinced that Christian parents are obligated to see to the training of their children. They can't turn it over to someone who's just a part of the state. Not that there aren't good teachers. And he began with that. And I suppose everybody realized that the first year that little bunch of kids met in the church, they would be in one side and we'd be trying to make transcriptions for the radio ministry across on the other wall. But John played principal the first year, and it was beyond him. So that's when Gene came. And Gene wore many hats, but he really established Norfolk Christian, not just here, but on an international basis. So all these beginnings are so small. Then when you look back and realize God was doing exactly what he wanted, and what else could you ask?
We reached out to the community. It was the chain between the home, the church, and the school, all working together. The parents coming in to support the school and to share the teaching in the home as the teachers were sharing it in the school, having the students have that stability and that continuity of the home, the church, and the school.
And it was in that order.
Mm-hmm.
It was not the school and then the home and then the church, or it was in the first motto of Norfolk Christian Schools was Norfolk Christian Schools, an extension of the Christian home.
Mm-hmm.
And his philosophy was all truth is God's truth, so that if you teach math, you are teaching about God. So we taught quality math and how math reveals God, quality science, truth, facts, the truth in science, whatever we were teaching, and how God is revealed in it and what God's purpose might be for this truth, how God expects, because all truth is God's truth and it reveals him. And Dr. Gaberline's philosophy of Christian education is that we were made, all of the world was made to reveal God, and God would be there. If you looked at science, philosophy, math, anything, religion, anything, you would find God, because creation reflects who God is. And so it was the Christian home wants their children to have this kind of knowledge of the truth. And so Norfolk Christian exists not in opposition to the public schools, because they teach truth also. It wasn't that the public schools are inferior. It was that the public schools can't be a partner with the Christian home and show what God is in these subjects. money was different in those days. You didn't have nearly as much. So the amounts will sound almost impossible, but tuition for Norfolk kindergarten was $21 a month. My son was in the first kindergarten class, and tuition was $21 a month, which doesn't sound like very much to you compared to what you give, but it was a lot to us, and for us to come up with $21 was just about an impossibility for us. So we decided that we could eat on less money. So we took our food budget and took out of it by the week enough to make $21 a month. And I can tell you that there was never a time when we didn't have enough food. We were adequately, I really didn't notice the difference in how easy it was to prepare meals. Although we cut our budget down to get $21 out of it, the only place we could get it was out of food money. And we lived on a budget. Mr. Dunlap really believed that money was a part of our dedication to God, and he believed in going with paying your way. So nobody in Tabernacle Church who was following Mr. Dunlap would go in debt. They believed, he said, where God's finger points, his hand will make the way. So we took that to say, if God is pointing to kindergarten for Tommy, then God will make the way for us to have everything we need to put him there. So we put him in for $21 a month, took the money for $21 a month to pay out of our food budget, and we never missed anything. We were fine. But I can tell you a story about somebody else who, Bill Miller was, Mr. Dunlap wanted Bill Miller to become the building and maintenance man for the school and the church. And he worked for the railroad at that time. And a railroad man made a lot more money than a lot of people did. So, but Billy left his job with the railroad and became the building and maintenance man. And we all had little children. And somebody said to Billy, if you take that job for the school and church and make so little, how do you expect to put your children through college? And Billy said, God will make the way. I won't have to prepare and make a way for my son and my daughter to go to college. God will take care of that when the time comes. And so, although they made very little money working for the school and the church, they trusted God so that when the time came for their children to go to school, the money would be there. And when Jim graduated, Jim was the older, and when he graduated, he got a complete academic scholarship from Old Dominion in the sports program. So he had everything he needed. God had provided it. And Billy didn't have to lay it aside. He believed that God was going to provide it when it was there, and it did, and he did. And then when Becky came along, everything that she needed, the economy was such at that time that everything she needed to go to school was there. When the time came, it was always there. It was never provided ahead of time. It wasn't laid aside for their education. It was there. When our children got ready to go to school, I taught kindergarten, and my salary for teaching kindergarten was, I think, $50 a month. And it was $1,000 a year is what I made to teach kindergarten at Norfolk Christian. And when my children got ready to go to school, they worked their way through with us. We only had to provide their books, and it was there, except my oldest son, the Marine Corps sent him, but the rest of them. So it was there. We didn't feel like we had to lay it up. We felt God will take care of it. He's promised that he would, and he did.
One of the things that as parents or as couples we learned was that we could live a good life in the Lord and not spend volumes of money. I think most of the ladies learned to sew. We sewed our children's clothes, our girls' clothes, our clothes. Vacations weren't spent in expensive ways. We learned that the state of Virginia had wonderful state parks, and a lot of our families went to the state parks for their vacations and had a wonderful time outside. They had cottages. If you didn't have the camping equipment, you could rent a cottage for very little and spend a nice week up in the mountains here at the seashore. We learned we didn't have to have a new car every 2 or 3 years. There was a parent in Norfolk Christian Schools who was a used car salesman for Perry Buick. And he was a wonderful source of used cars for many of us. in the church, in the school. And we just learned we could have a good life in the Lord without having to have the very best of everything. We could do without and get along just fine. My daughter remembers going to the store with me with the $20 bill, and I was feeding 6 people 3 meals a day. But then things were a lot cheaper. You could do it, but you had to really know what you were doing. I worked for the school for 20 years, and for the most part it was for my children's tuition. I had 3 children in the school. And now that I'm older and I'm a widow and have been for 8 years, I have to say with all the fervor I can say it, God has provided for me. We were not able to lay up a lot of retirement money, but God has provided for me in wonderful ways. I'm well taken care of, and whatever sacrifice we made in the past was worth every bit of it.
It didn't feel like sacrifice.
No.
It felt like privilege.
Right.
It really didn't. When people say how we sacrificed, actually, you hear these stories and you think people have done without because they've done these things, but they haven't. Their life was richer and better. Everybody's that I know. People who mortgaged their homes found God. They didn't lose their homes. They kept their homes, and they were still rich because they were able to do all of the things that were needful for their family. We didn't really give up things. We gained. We really gained. And it shouldn't sound super spiritual because it was a blessing. When we went out camping together, we would go as groups, and we were enriched by doing that. We were much better off by doing the things. God showed us a better path. It wasn't a sparse path.